Christopher Plummer, and Julie Andrews became forever linked by The Sound of Music, a film that followed them for more than half a century. On screen, they represented romance, certainty, and harmony. Off-screen, their connection unfolded very differently, shaped by professionalism, time, and a bond that refused to fade even as careers, marriages, and decades passed. For years, Plummer distanced himself from the film that made him a household name, while Julie embraced its legacy with grace. Yet behind that public contrast, something quieter endured. They remained in each other's lives, exchanging warmth, respect, and a shared understanding forged under the pressure of sudden fame. Now at 91, Christopher Plummer was finally ready to speak about love in a way that surprised those who thought they knew his story. It was not about romance or regret, but about something that lasted longer than applause, and it leaves one question hanging. Who was the love Plummer finally chose to acknowledge at the very end? Before Christopher Plummer and Julie Andrews became permanently linked in the public imagination, they were simply two artists arriving at a crossroads in their own lives. Neither entered The Sound of Music searching for legacy. Both arrived carrying experience, discipline, and a complicated relationship with fame that had already begun to take shape. Christopher Plummer came from the stage. Classically trained, intellectually rigorous, and deeply committed to craft, he saw himself first and foremost as a serious actor. Shakespeare, theater, and disciplined performance defined his identity. Film, at that stage, was work, not destiny. He was respected for his talent long before he was widely known, and he carried with him a quiet skepticism toward projects that leaned too heavily on sentiment. Plummer valued depth, challenge, and control, qualities he spent years refining before stepping onto the alpine sets that would later define him for millions. Julie Andrews arrived from a different, though equally demanding, path. By the time she was cast as Maria, she was already a Broadway sensation, known for precision, vocal discipline, and emotional clarity. Her success had been hard-earned, shaped by years of performance that demanded consistency rather than spontaneity. Andrews understood the weight of expectation early. She had learned how to balance warmth with professionalism, openness with restraint. When they were cast together in The Sound of Music, released in 1965, neither could have predicted what the film would become. The role of Captain Von Trapp asked Plummer to soften, to inhabit restraint, rather than dominance. For Andrews, Maria required vulnerability paired with strength. Their performances worked not because of manufactured chemistry, but because both approached the story with seriousness. They respected the work, even when their personal relationships to the material differed. Behind the scenes, their bond was built on professionalism. They trusted each other. They showed up prepared. There was no spectacle, no dramatic mythology unfolding between takes. What existed was mutual recognition. Each saw in the other a commitment to craft that mirrored their own. That recognition became the foundation of something lasting. As filming progressed, the weight of the project became apparent. The film's tone, its optimism, and its emotional clarity stood in contrast to the complexity both actors had lived within their careers. Plummer, in particular, struggled with the film's simplicity, a discomfort he would later acknowledge openly. Andrews, however, understood the power of sincerity. She recognized that audiences often need reassurance as much as challenge. This difference did not divide them. It balanced them. Where Plummer questioned, Andrews grounded. Where Andrews embraced, Plummer refined. Together they created something that neither fully claimed as personal truth, yet both honored as honest work. What matters about this period is not what followed, but what was established. Their connection was never built on romance or fantasy. It was built on respect earned under pressure, on shared responsibility during a moment that would alter both of their lives permanently. Long before the film became a symbol, long before audiences projected meaning onto their pairing, Plummer and Andrews formed a bond rooted in professionalism and trust. That bond would outlast discomfort, distance, and decades of interpretation. But at the beginning, Before fame rewrote the narrative, it existed quietly. Two actors, meeting at a pivotal moment, unaware that their shared work would follow them for the rest of their lives, and that one day near the very end, it would also shape how love itself would be remembered. When The Sound of Music was released in 1965, it did not simply succeed, it endured. Audiences returned to it again and again, turning a single film into a cultural fixture that followed Christopher Plummer and Julie Andrews far beyond its original moment. What had begun as a professional assignment quickly became a defining reference point, one neither actor could fully step away from, no matter how their careers evolved. For Julie Andrews, the film aligned naturally with her public identity. She understood the emotional clarity audiences found in Maria. She recognized that sincerity, when delivered without irony, could be powerful. Andrews did not resist the film's reception. She carried it with grace, speaking of it with warmth and appreciation, even as she continued to challenge herself in other roles. The film became part of her story, not its limit. For Christopher Plummer, the experience was more complicated. He had approached the role with discipline and care, yet he struggled with how completely the film came to define him in the public eye. Plummer had built his identity on classical theater and intellectual rigor. Being remembered primarily for a role rooted in gentleness and restraint felt limiting to an actor who valued complexity. Over the years, he spoke candidly about that discomfort, acknowledging that it took time for him to make peace with the film's place in his life. This divergence in how they carried the film forward created a subtle contrast. Andrews embraced its legacy. Plummer wrestled with it. Yet even within that difference, their respect for each other remained steady. They understood that the same experience could shape two lives in different ways without diminishing its value. As the decades passed, The Sound of Music became less about individual performance and more about shared memory. It followed them into interviews, retrospectives, and public appearances. They were asked about it repeatedly, sometimes to the exclusion of everything else they had accomplished. Andrews answered with patience. Plummer, though occasionally weary, never dismissed the work itself. He acknowledged its craftsmanship, its reach, and its meaning to audiences, even when it conflicted with his personal artistic preferences. What mattered was that neither allowed the film to erode their bond. The pressure of being forever linked could have created resentment. Instead, it fostered understanding. Andrews recognized Plummer's frustration without taking it personally. Plummer respected Andrews' openness without diminishing it. They met in the middle, united by the knowledge that the film belonged to the audience now, not to them. Their shared legacy became a quiet point of connection, rather than a burden. They did not cling to it, nor did they attempt to redefine it publicly. They allowed time to soften its edges. With each passing year, Plummer's relationship with the film evolved. Distance gave him perspective. He began to speak of it with more generosity, acknowledging that its endurance represented something rare, a piece of work that continued to bring comfort long after its creators had moved on. This shift did not happen all at once. It arrived slowly, shaped by age, reflection, and the understanding that legacy cannot be controlled. Through it all, Julie Andrews remained a constant presence, someone who shared the experience without demanding agreement. Their bond survived not because they felt the same way about the film, but because they respected each other's truth. By the time the film settled into history, it had done more than define careers. It had bound two artists together through shared responsibility, mutual regard, and a legacy neither fully chose, yet both carried with dignity. And in that shared endurance, something deeper than fame began to take shape, a connection strengthened not by agreement, but by time itself. As the years moved forward, Christopher Plummer and Julie Andrews no longer needed the sound of music to keep them connected. Careers expanded, lives changed, and personal chapters unfolded far from the alpine hills that first linked their names. Yet the bond formed during that pivotal moment never dissolved. It simply changed shape, becoming steadier, quieter and less visible to the world watching from the outside. Their connection did not depend on proximity. They were not constant fixtures in each other's daily lives, nor did they rely on public appearances to affirm familiarity. Instead, their bond lived in continuity. When they did meet, there was ease. When they spoke, there was understanding. Decades of shared history removed the need for performance. What remained was recognition. Julie Andrews continued to evolve as an artist, embracing roles that reflected maturity, wisdom, and emotional depth. She carried herself with openness, often reflecting on her career with gratitude rather than nostalgia. Her relationship with the sound of music remained affectionate, but she never allowed it to eclipse her growth. Plummer watched this with admiration. He saw how she held space for the past without becoming confined by it. Christopher Plummer's later career brought a different kind of reward. With age came freedom. He no longer needed to prove seriousness or depth. Roles arrived that allowed him to explore vulnerability, humor, and introspection. When he won an Academy Award at the age of 82 for Beginners, it marked not a resurgence, but a recognition long overdue. In that moment he spoke with warmth and humility, qualities that mirrored the way he had come to view his life as a whole. Throughout these later years, Julie remained present, not as a co-star chasing relevance, but as a peer who understood the arc of a long career. They shared an appreciation for endurance, for the quiet victories that come after the applause fades. Their conversations reflected that maturity. There was no need to revisit old tensions or explain past discomforts. Time had already done that work. Their friendship stood out precisely because it resisted categorization. It was not romantic. It was not nostalgic in the way audiences often expect. It was grounded in respect that had survived misunderstanding, fame, and reinterpretation. They had seen each other at moments of uncertainty and strength. That shared witness created trust. As Christopher Plummer aged, reflection became more present in how he spoke about his life. He acknowledged mistakes, growth, and gratitude with clarity, rather than sentimentality. When he spoke of Julie Andrews in later years, his tone carried affection without embellishment. He recognized her steadiness, her professionalism, and her kindness. These were not casual compliments. They were acknowledgments earned over time. This stage of their relationship reveals something essential. Not all meaningful connections are loud or visible. Some endure precisely because they are allowed to remain private. Plummer and Andrews did not need to redefine their bond publicly. It existed beyond labels, sustained by shared memory and mutual regard. As the years narrowed toward their final chapters, the significance of that bond became clearer. Careers fade from daily conversation. Applause grows distant. What remains are the people who knew you when it mattered most. For Christopher Plummer, Julie Andrews was one of those constants. Not a role he played, not a story retold, a presence that endured, quietly, faithfully, and without demand. As Christopher Plummer entered the later years of his life, reflection began to replace ambition. The urgency that once drove him toward the next role softened into something steadier, a desire to understand what had lasted and why. He had nothing left to prove. His career spanned stage and screen with distinction, capped by recognition that arrived even in his 80s. What remained was perspective, and with it, a clearer language for gratitude. Plummer spoke differently in these years. His tone carried ease rather than edge, warmth rather than resistance. Time had reshaped his relationship with the work that once unsettled him, especially the sound of music. He no longer defined himself against it. He understood its place, both in the culture and in his own life. With that understanding came space to acknowledge the people bound to that chapter, not as symbols but as companions through time. Julie Andrews stood apart in that recognition. She was not someone he spoke of for effect. When he mentioned her, it was with a familiarity shaped by decades, not nostalgia sharpened for an audience. He recognized her professionalism, her steadiness, and her generosity of spirit. These were qualities he had seen consistently, across years when attention shifted and when it faded. His regard for her was rooted in observation, not sentiment. This is where the idea of confession often becomes misunderstood. Plummer did not offer a dramatic declaration or a single defining statement. His acknowledgement unfolded through tone, timing, and the way he framed what mattered most as his life narrowed toward reflection. He spoke about love not as romance, but as endurance, not as possession, but as presence. At 91, near the end of his life, Plummer's understanding of love had matured beyond performance. He had lived through marriages, successes, and failures. He had experienced acclaim and criticism, enthusiasm and doubt. What endured was not the applause. It was the people who remained recognizable when everything else changed. In that quiet accounting, Julie Andrews represented something rare, a bond untouched by competition, expectation, or demand. Their connection did not replace the love he shared with his wife, Elaine Taylor, to whom he was married for more than 5 decades. That distinction matters. The love Plummer recognized in Julie was different in nature, shaped by shared history, mutual respect, and the kind of loyalty that asks for nothing in return. It was the love of understanding, of being known without explanation. In speaking of her with such clarity, Plummer revealed what he valued most in his final years. He valued constancy. He valued grace under pressure. He valued people who carried the weight of legacy without being defined by it. Julie Andrews embodied those values, not because of who she was to the world, but because of who she had consistently been to him. This recognition did not arrive as a revelation meant to surprise. It arrived as truth finally named. Plummer did not need to dramatize it. He simply allowed it to be visible. In doing so, he reframed the meaning of love itself, not as something loud or consuming, but as something that remains when ambition fades and only honesty is left. By the time he spoke this way, the confession had already been lived. Words merely caught up to experience. And in that quiet alignment between reflection and recognition, Christopher Plummer showed that the deepest loves are often the ones that never needed declaration until the very end. As Christopher Plummer's life moved toward its final chapter, what endured was not the scale of his achievements, but the clarity with which he understood what had mattered most. Awards, roles, and applause settled into perspective. They were meaningful, but they were not permanent. What remained were the relationships that had survived time without needing reinvention. Among those, his bond with Julie Andrews stood quietly intact. This was not a love shaped by proximity or dependency. It was formed through shared experience and sustained through mutual regard. They had witnessed each other at pivotal moments, not just during the making of The Sound of Music, but across decades that tested resilience and character. Careers expanded, personal lives evolved, and public perception shifted. Yet their connection stayed steady. It did not demand attention. It did not compete with other loves. It simply existed. In his later years, Plummer spoke often about gratitude. He understood that longevity, both in life and career, is rare. He also understood that few relationships endure the distortions of fame without changing form. The reason his connection with Julie Andrews lasted was not because it resisted change, but because it adapted without losing integrity. They allowed distance without detachment. They accepted difference without resentment. Julie, for her part, spoke of Plummer with warmth and affection that reflected deep familiarity. She did not mythologize him. She remembered him as he was, complex, disciplined, humorous, and thoughtful. When he passed away in 2021, her words carried the weight of genuine loss, not nostalgia performed for the public. It was clear that their bond had not faded with time, it had matured. Plummer's understanding of love in these final years was expansive. It included his marriage to Elaine Taylor, the partner who shared his life for more than 50 years. That love was foundational and central. Yet the love he recognized in Julie existed alongside it, not in competition, but in harmony. It was the love of shared history, of mutual recognition, of having been seen clearly at a moment that shaped everything that followed. What makes this truth resonate is its restraint. Plummer did not frame his feelings as revelation. He did not rank or compare. He acknowledged. In doing so, he gave voice to a kind of love often overlooked, one built on respect, consistency, and time. It is the love that remains when ambition quiets and identity simplifies. This final understanding reframes the way we think about legacy. Plummer's greatest roles will always be remembered. His talent is secure in history, yet the way he spoke about Julie Andrews near the end reveals something more intimate. It shows that beyond performance, beyond recognition, what lasts is the bond formed when two people meet at a crucial moment and continue to honor that meeting long after the moment has passed. In the end, the love Christopher Plummer recognized was not defined by romance or regret. It was defined by endurance. It was the presence that remained familiar when everything else changed. And in acknowledging it at last, he offered a quiet lesson, that the deepest connections are often the ones that never ask to be named, until time itself makes their meaning unmistakable. Christopher Plummer did not leave behind a dramatic declaration or a headline-ready confession. What he left was something quieter and far more enduring, a reflection shaped by time, humility, and clarity. Near the end of his life, love was no longer something he needed to define loudly. It was something he recognized in what had remained constant when everything else had shifted. His bond with Julie Andrews was never about romance or nostalgia. It was about shared responsibility, mutual respect, and the rare comfort of being fully understood at a pivotal moment in life. They carried that understanding forward without demanding more from it, allowing it to mature without performance or expectation. In acknowledging that love so late in life, Plummer revealed not regret, but gratitude. He showed that some connections are not measured by proximity or declaration, but by endurance. When ambition fades and applause grows distant, what matters most is who remains familiar, steady, and true. That was the love Christopher Plummer finally recognized, not at the height of fame, but at the quiet end of a remarkable life. For more emotional stories, check out this video.